Greetings and salutations. It's your man CD, the fallen angel Christopher Daniels, and I'm currently at home in Southern California enjoying Southern California things. And one of the things out in Southern California that you can enjoy is the Circle of Debate podcast. They're out here in Southern California giving you guys quality entertainment to listen to. So give them a listen. Tell them Christopher Daniels sent you. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Circle Debate Podcast. The host of Ginzburg, Ivan C. Here alongside with my brothers from another mother, my co-host, the CK1 himself, Chris Kennedy, and the Carbonation Cabron, Mr. MGC, Matt the Steamboat. This evening, we have a special honored guest that is joining us tonight, as he is the associate producer of The Wrestler. If you guys don't recognize the movie from the 2002 with Mickey Rourke. 2008, excuse me. I always forget. And then we also have, he's the associate producer for 350 Days. If you guys haven't seen that, we'll make sure to click for that. And also for Wrestling Then and Now as well. We have a special honorary guest, that is Mr. Evan Ginzburg. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Now, let's go ahead and get to start off. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question. We wanted to get, obviously, the viewers as well to get, to get to know you more. And so how did it begin about you getting into the film industry? How did that occur? How did it all begin with that?
I was an agent in pro wrestling, and I was sitting at an autograph signing with my dear friends Johnny Valiant and Nikolai Volkov. And we were approached by the executive producer of The Wrestler's best friend. The executive producer is the money guy. I was the wrestling guy. So just explain these titles. So we met with Darren Aronofsky, the screenwriter, the executive producer, Scott Franklin. I brought along Johnny Valiant, Nikolai, Tiger Khan. They're all gone now. All three of them are gone now. And Nikolai's manager, Nikita Brezhnikov. And we basically sat, had dinner, had a couple of drinks, and bonded. Johnny was the funniest guy in the world. He did stand-up comedy. Nikolai, Bret Hart said that Nikolai was the nicest person he ever met in pro wrestling. He was just a warm, like big teddy bear. And you guys are too young to remember early Nikolai. He used to squeeze fruit in his bare hands and it would explode. This is how powerful this guy was. But the sweetest guy in the world. We just hit it off with Darren Aronofsky, who's a genius. I mean, I was a fan before the meeting. I had seen Pie, Requiem for a Dream, his early films. And ultimately, time went by and finally I got a call and they said, we're on, let's do it. They hired me as associate producer, which basically meant I was in charge of the wrestling. I brought in Mickey Rourke's stunt double, the Ring. I brought in Ring of Honor. I brought in Necro Butcher, Ron Killings. Who else? Romeo Roselli, all the indie guys. I did 5 or 6 casting calls where we had hundreds of wrestlers in the studio down in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Protozoa's Darren Aronofsky's company.
Were you also involved with bringing in CZW with the movie as well?
I brought in Ring of Honor and New Japan and CZW also. We were at Cage of Death. We were at Cage of Death.
Yeah.
And we were backstage. I'm backstage with Mickey Rourke and Darren. It was like a MASH unit. It was insane. There was like blood everywhere. Am I allowed to curse on your show? I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Yes. No.
So I said to Mickey, I said, what did you think? He goes, that was fucking great. It's insane. These guys are going through panes of glass, and it was just
there were a lot of light tubes, I think, as well, the fluorescent lights.
Light tubes, fluorescent light tubes, glass. I mean, they're backstage like bleeding like pigs. It was crazy. So,
Sorry,
so
go
I
ahead.
brought in Necro Butcher, and I'll tell you a funny Necro Butcher story. I'm at the studio with Darren, and we're waiting to meet with Necro. I said he'd be perfect for that hardcore scene. So we're waiting. The guy's like 2.5 hours late. Okay, so I start the call because Darren's getting impatient. So I call up the contact number. I get his mother, Necro Butcher's mother, and now she's worried. She's worried. Where's my boy Dylan? His real name is Dylan. Like, I'm used to seeing this guy, like, do the craziest stuff imaginable. And she's like, where's Dylan? I'm concerned. So eventually we all connected. He showed up, and the rest is history.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
Thank you.
When it came to the wrestling in I mean, obviously the story is what's paramount in The Wrestler. When it came to the wrestling, I use the word choreography. That's what it is. It's choreography. The storytelling and the wrestlers, how much of that was up to them, or did they have a bullet point to get the story told within the story that they decided themselves, or was there a stunt coordinator? Because obviously wrestlers are, I think, pseudo stuntmen.
With Darren Aronofsky, a lot of it is improv. I mean, of course, you had to have the cameras in a certain place, and Darren did give them directions, obviously, but there was a lot of improv in that movie, even with some dialogue. So to answer your question, sure, it was choreographed, and there was a stunt double because Mickey couldn't do everything. The guy was in his 50s, early 50s at the time.
And that was the story.
What's that?
And that was the story, was that he was playing a wrestler in that same point of his life, much like Mickey Rourke was back then as well.
Oh, yeah. And he basically was an athlete. He had been a boxer, and he picked it up quickly, but there was certain things like jumps off the top rope where the stunt double did it, to be honest. But,
That was an iconic scene. I know what scene that is.
Yeah. And, but all in all, Mickey he got hurt at one point. It was tough. It was a tough gig for him, and he was not paid a fortune of money, but he won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in the world, and he lost at the Academy Awards to Sean Penn for Milk. But he was recognized for that movie, and his real financial payoff for the movie was his next film when he was the heel in Iron Man.
Whiplash.
Yeah, Iron Man 2, I believe.
Yep,
So that was his real. He got like $1 million for that. So that was the real payoff.
Yeah, that was a breakout. I mean, I don't want to say breakout for him. That was a resurgence with the younger crowd who didn't grow up watching his earlier movies.
He's a tremendous actor.
I'm old enough to have kind of grown up on early Mickey Rourke films. Real quick, your camera might be a little bit blurry. We're not sure if that just needs to be adjusted at all. I'm not sure.
What do I do?
I'm not sure if it's just a matter of moving it. It might just need to refocus on you. I'm not sure.
I think it might be good. Is it good now?
I think they have like autofocus. Yeah, it should be good. Looks better. Cool.
Yeah, I'm not really a tech guy.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mickey's tremendous. Was he? I know he had a boxing career before he was in, obviously, The Boxer, and then also afterwards. Was it The Wrestler that kind of persuaded him to go back into wrestling? Because I know he had an exhibition match in, I want to say Japan or India. I forget which one it was, but that wasn't shortly after the hype of that film. Was that something he was contemplating at the time, or decided to do?
I don't know anything about an international wrestling match.
No, it was. I think it was an exhibition boxing match.
Exhibition. Yeah, that was much later. That was a few years back. He was in his 60s at the time.
Right. So do you think
that was in Russia? Yeah.
Yeah, Russia. That's right. Do you think him getting back into a wrestling ring kind of sparked that I got one more in me type of attitude?
He's a legitimate tough guy. He was a box office matinee idol sex symbol, and he left film to box, to get punched in the face. This isn't a normal career trajectory. So really, he's a pure actor, and he did not really there were things about the film industry, the hypocrisy of it, you know, that he just didn't like. But so I think he's as comfortable in a boxing ring, if not more so, than with the wrong director. See, Aronofsky's a genius director, so it all worked out.
Because you can't punch the wrong director, but you can punch the right opponent.
That's right. He's what you would call a tough guy, but a big-hearted guy. He always had his dog with him. I never saw him say no for an autograph or a Polaroid or, you know, whatever the case may be back then. This was a while ago.
I know him and Stallone have worked together a number of times, both in The Expendables and Get Carter. So like Mickey Rourke and Stallone and Get Carter had a pretty like drag out knuckle drag scene in that movie, and then of course, you know, them in The Expendables. Have you ever has you know, your relationship with Mickey Rourke ever led you to meeting Sylvester Stallone at any point? Or
I didn't meet Sylvester Stallone, but I did meet Nicolas Cage, and this is an interesting story. We could not get the funding that we needed for this movie off of Mickey's name at the time. His star had declined to a degree. So I met Nicolas Cage in the basement in the parking lot of the Manhattan Center at a Ring of Honor show. And I was told, just get him in quickly, you know, without the paparazzi, without any attention, just get him in. I was like the point man. So I meet him in the parking lot, and for 30 seconds, I'm kind of mocking out. And then I like look at his shoes and look at his jeans, and I'm like, he's a normal guy, like everybody else, you know? And he was a very warm, down-to-earth guy. And again, you know, every wrestler that wanted a picture wanted, you know, to shake hands with him. The guy couldn't be any nicer. And at the time, you know, this is going back 2006, 2007. You know, he was on top of the world, Nicolas Cage, you know? And we wanted to get $18 million to do The Wrestler, which is basically like the food budget on The Avengers. Okay? You know?
I called Joss Whedon.
Yeah. So we couldn't get the money. So when you see that movie, those are real fans. You know, we would go into Ring of Honor shows, and they would be mad that we were interrupting to shoot. You know, they were like, you're interrupting our show. At one point, there was so much heat, Darren had to get on the mic and go, listen, guys, we're going to do good by you. Just let us get 1 or 2 takes. We'll be out of your way, you know? So to make a long story short, I'm sitting with Darren one day, and he goes, Evan, you know, Nicholas is a great guy, but he's a walking corporation. You know, when you hire him, you got the agent, the manager, you know, the makeup guy, the hairstylist. You know, Mickey walked around with like one tough guy friend. And what Darren said to me was, Mickey fit the part. He looked like he'd been through something. You know, he looked like an old wrestler who had been to hell and back. He was the right guy. And the decision was made. Darren went with art over money. He may have made more money with Nicolas Cage, who was hot at the time, but Mickey Rourke, I tell people, and it's not because I was part of it, I tell people that scene where he says to his daughter, I'm just a broken down piece of meat. I would look around the theaters, people were sobbing. I think that's going to be an iconic moment in films like Marlon Brando and On the Waterfront. I could have been a contender. Seriously. Yeah. I think 100 years from now, they'll watch that movie because of his performance. And I said to him, you know, what did you think of the film after it was all done? He said to me, I can't watch it. It reminds me too much of my own life. You know, going to the top, falling back down, and eventually coming back up. But he was the right guy, because that was him. That was him, you know?
When you just now talked about how people are going to go back and watch this movie for his performance, before we started this podcast, I was thinking about the legacy of it and how it still affects kids who are now still coming up in the world in wrestling, who may, I mean, I guess they'd be about 12 years old if they were born in 2008, but who maybe not have been watching mature films when they were born coming up. This to me is the natural. This is like their Redford. This is the field of dreams of wrestling fiction. And for it to, I think, will stand the test of time for basically any wrestling fan who needs a film to speak to them, whether, like you mentioned, a retired wrestler or just a fan or an up-and-coming indie star. I do think that it will. I mean, we're talking about it. Here we are 12 years later. It's still relevant. There are people still watching it. And like you said, Rourke's performance, the Golden Globe was definitely deserved. It's a very tough competition against Milk. I would not have been disappointed, obviously, if Mickey had gotten that. Obviously, everyone on the film.
I was disappointed Mickey didn't get it, but the Golden Globe is pretty prestigious.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people think that's sometimes the award you want. Obviously, the Academy Award would have been great, but definitely deserved every award he got for that. And I do think that it'll be talked about for the next several generations of pro wrestling fans.
I appreciate it, and people don't realize for about 6 months prior to the shooting, and the entire process was 7 years. From the time I met them to the time we shot it, there were 5 or 6 script revisions. Then, of course, you got to go chase the money. I sat at various funding meetings, and that's tough. You know, you're selling a movie about wrestling. You know, wrestling has a stigma to it. Thank you, Vince McMahon, for turning it.
And you're trying to make a mature, true-to-life film that kind of does mirror what does go on, especially with someone in his position in that film when Ram had to look at himself and say, I've got one more in me. So selling that, I can imagine, to a studio for funding. A lot of wrestling people, they want a comedy. They want the Bring It Ons or what was that Fight Night movie, the Rocky comedy with Joey Diaz was in it, where it was like the MMA comedy film. They tend to lean that direction. So I can imagine the mature, you know, Aronofsky obviously is no joke. He knows what he's doing with the series.
Ultimately, Darren kept saying to me, I want this to ring true. I want this to feel, you know, like an indie wrestling show. So for 6 months prior, I took them to indie wrestling shows, including Ring of Honor, but also the lowest level indie wrestling shows.
That's where I started.
Where there's 37 guys in the audience and 3 are paid, you know?
Yeah, I got paid in pizza, man.
So, you know, they saw that a lot of this was not glamorous, and we go into the locker room. You know, I was like the point man, because as an agent, I knew a lot of the East Coast indie promoters. So, you know, and they knew Aronofsky to a degree. Some wrestling people only know wrestling. So I still had to do a little selling. This guy's the legitimate director. So, you know, we go into the locker room and we talk to King Kong Bundy, and we talk to, you know, various guys who were still on the circuit at the time. And one story, this is an unbelievable story. I take them to a convention, a wrestling convention, and listen to this. This is like the all-star lineup in heaven, okay? They had Fabulous Moolah, Mae Young, Lou Albano, Nikolai Volkov, Johnny Valiant, etc., so on. And there was nobody there. There was nobody there. It was grim. And Aronofsky, I'll never forget it, he kept saying to me, Evan, where is everybody? Because these are the guys he grew up on. He was a mid-'80s Hulkamania, you know, he's like 50-ish now, late 40s, 50. You know, he was a Hulkamania era fan, and so was the screenwriter, and so was the executive producer. And they're like, these were like gods to them, and there's nobody there. And the Iron Sheik's head was on the table, sleeping. That's how empty it was. Mm-hmm. And that was not in the original script, okay? So the screenwriter, Rob Siegel, writes it into the script, and I'm at the set as they're filming it. And if you see that scene with the wrestlers, the autograph scene, those are all my gimmicks on the tables. I actually set all that up so it would look legit. And Aronofsky suddenly gets this smirk and he goes, Evan, come here. I go, yeah. So next thing I know, he says, Evan, I want you to, work the crowd there, walk up to Mickey last, ask him for a quote, an autograph, and a Polaroid, because this was old school, Polaroid. So I'm like, okay, I'm not an actor. So Mickey whispers in my ear, he goes, just improv it. He doesn't realize I've never acted in my life. So the whole time, I finally walk up to Mickey. There's 125 or so people on this set, giant cameras in my face. And I'm thinking, what do I say? So I go, I loved you as a kid. I saw you at Madison Square Garden. Can I have your autograph? That's what I would say to any wrestler, and he goes.
Right here. That comes from right here.
From the heart. So he goes, what's your name? And I'm thinking, so I just go, Evan. And it dawns on me how surreal this is. I'm playing myself in a fictional movie. It's even in the trailer. If you watch the trailer, it's there.
I remember the scene. Yeah.
So Johnny Valiant he did the Sheik bit. His head was on the table asleep. That's how grim it was supposed to be. Aronofsky told him, put your head on the table. Make like you're sleeping. So Johnny said to me, he goes, Evan, your hand was shaking, okay? Because, I'm not an actor, and all eyes are on you, It was quite an experience. So cut to the chase, we're at the New York Film Festival, the first screening of the movie, 2,300 people, Lincoln Center, sold out. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she looks at the screen, she looks at me, she looks at the screen, she goes, that's you. How bizarre this is, okay? So we got a spontaneous standing ovation. And it was, I tell people, it was the greatest night of my life. 7 years of hard work, and it paid off. It paid off. And the rest is history. I mean, financially, it did fine. Again, it wasn't the Avengers or Spider-Man, but, it made money and critical acclaim. And like I said, I sincerely think Mickey's performance is iconic.
Of course. And Evan, I must say that rather than, the other films, rather than like Milk or Avengers, I'd say the more elephant in the room comparison is probably the 1974 wrestler, with Vern Gagne and of course.
There was no connection, and that was very campy, but I enjoyed it because those are like my childhood heroes. Billy Graham and Dusty Rhodes and
Billy Robinson.
I enjoyed it for what it was, but it's no masterpiece,
Yep, I agree. Now, I want to go ahead and jump on you becoming as a pro wrestling fan. I know I've seen your previous interviews as well that your mother was a pro wrestling fan. I believe your family was, right? And then that's how you got involved as a child. And so who was at that time, your idols, your childhood idols, when you were a child, as you were growing up watching, these performers like the Nikolai, San Martino, Billy Graham?
Well, I grew up, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, and guys, I don't know why the camera goes in and out of focus, but I'm doing my best.
Now.
You're all
doing
good.
my best, yeah.
Might just be a distancing or something.
I don't know. But anyway, back in the old days, we had a black and white TV and a UHF dial. I don't know if young guys even know what that is.
We
UHF dial.
Yeah,
so,
we had to go to channel 3.
So I'm flipping the UHF dial, and there's this Indian getting pounded by this bigger guy, and it was Chief Jay Strongbow. And I'm a kid.
Ooh,
I'm a kid.
The sleeper hold or whatever.
Yeah. And I didn't even know what it was, to be honest. My mother, I said, Mom, what is this? And she says, it's wrestling. She said she loved wrestling when she was a kid. She used to see Kowalski and Haystacks Calhoun, and these guys were still active when I was a kid. They were getting older, but they were still out there. So I'm watching it. I think it's all real, and all of a sudden, Strongbow does like this herky-jerky war dance, and he pins the much bigger guy. And I'm like, wow, And my father finally takes me to Madison Square Garden, June 24, 1974. That's the impression it makes. I could tell you the day. And I walk into the garden with my dad, and I'm a kid, and I go, wow, it's in color. It's in color. You know, because the TV was black and white, you know? And there's Nikolai and Fred Blassie against Bruno and Strongbow in the main event. The Valiant brothers against Dean Ho and Tony Gurria. Black Gordman, who I was watching on the LA tapings in New York. I mean, Kowalski, Calhoun. I mean, these guys, all-time, you know, legends. And it was like Marvel superheroes and villains come to life.
I compare it to that. I compare it to that all the time. That's what I tell people.
For a kid to sit there and see this, you know, it was magic. And the next month, John Tolos, the Golden Greek, came in from LA to wrestle Bruno. And this guy was one of the greatest talkers of all time. It's a shame there's not more footage of this guy because he was as great as anybody. Oh my God!
I think that was during Bruno's like 4,000-day title reign too. I think somewhere back in there.
Bruno, that was his second reign. The first one was like 8 years, and the second one was like 3.5 years. That was the second reign. I'm talking 74, 75, 76. He lost to Graham in 77.
Yes.
So so it was magic, and you know, so here's how I got smartened up. This is a funny story. The big kids, the big kids, they said to me, Evan, Billy Graham's going to beat Bruno April 30, 1977 in Baltimore. I'm like, what are you talking about? And it happened exactly the way they said it. You know, it's like the word got out, and that was it.
Not real. That's the moment for me too. When I think Yokozuna sat on Hogan and like broke his ribs, and he got carted off, and then I was freaking out, crying, and my mom's like, Santa's not real. It's fake. I'm like, oh, I was actually kind of relieved in that particular moment.
Right.
That was my very similar moment, that awakening.
Yeah, and it was disillusioning at first, and then, you know, Billy Graham was having a return match with Bruno, and I'm like, I can't miss that, you know? And I just enjoyed it on a different level, you know? It's, you know, you watch, as a kid, you're watching Bruce Lee. He didn't kill Chuck Norris. You're watching Clint Eastwood. He didn't shoot the guy dead, you know? It's so you just enjoy it. Wrestling is a great, great art when done well. When done well.
Agreed, 100%.
AJ Styles is an artist. AJ Styles is an artist. Okada, you know, Naito, all these guys are artists. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I get a little bored with the old school fans. I'm no kid, but when they go, there's been no good wrestling since the territories, I say, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, seriously.
I definitely agree with that 100%.
Pro Wrestling Noah right behind me.
There you go. Pro Wrestling Noah. Yeah. I subscribe to ROH Honor Club. I subscribe to New Japan World. I support pro wrestling. I go to indies all the time. You know, I respect pro wrestling. I do not appreciate Raw and SmackDown. I think they turned it into a circus.
So how do you feel about AEW? That's the other.
I happen to like AEW very much. I think the Lucha Brothers are amazing. I think the Young Bucks are amazing, and
Kenny Omega.
Kenny Omega
and
and Okada had the best matches of the past 10 years. You know?
All three of them were like 6-star matches.
Yeah, so when the old school fans go, oh, they're just spot monkeys, I go, no, you're just living in the past. These guys are
I love that attitude.
Kenny Omega brought me back to wrestling, if anything. Like he kind of, it was only in the past 2 years that I've really just sunk back in, because like from 03 till now, I haven't been like as big into it. And especially like watching your movie, The Wrestler, that was like another big like, wait a minute, so that's how it happened. That's how blading works. That's how, you know, especially the blading scene in The Wrestler. That was probably like the one thing I always think about. And then when I think about when Hogan talks about the blade, you know.
Well, back in the day, you know, they used to say red is green. You'd see the you'd see the covers of the magazines, and these guys were covered in blood, Billy Graham and Bruno, and the magazines made these guys stars before the internet,
Yes.
and even before, wrestling went national on cable TV. They'd see these guys in the covers of magazines, and they'd get booked all over the world. Guys like Dusty Rhodes and Haystacks Calhoun and Andre the Giant, they went from, territory to territory.
Yes, they did, most definitely. Now, in regards for that, now when, the whole kayfabe started now to be exposed, what was your feeling about that when it was actually exposed? I know prior before, none of us, even as a child myself, even though I grew up more with the 80s era, like late 70s, early 80s. I grew up with AWA, and I grew up with, WWF at the time.
I loved AWA. I saw AWA in Jersey. Yeah.
Yes, love it. So what was your thoughts about, the kayfabe being exposed, and now we know that this actually is choreographed, unfortunately. I mean, the storylines, everything else, but obviously, kudos to...
I have no problem with it being exposed. I just think it's overexposed. I don't need to know the result before I've seen the actual pay-per-view. I don't need, a 10,000 word write-up of every meaningless Raw or SmackDown. I want to just see a good match. That's at this point, I'm watching almost 50 years. I started watching in 72. That's almost 50 years. All I want to see is a great wrestling match. I don't need some guy overanalyzing it, some obsessive fanboy. Oh, he's overrated. Really, it's an art form, and respect these guys as artists. And
sounds like a Dave Meltzer to me. Sorry, my apologies, interrupt, but it does sound like a Dave Meltzer right there. But yeah, no disrespect to Meltzer.
Meltzer knows his wrestling. You also know his biases. He obviously leans towards Japan, and
yes.
But all in all, Japanese wrestling is better than WWE wrestling.
Of course, I mean that's 100%. It's 100%. Yeah. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. From that first show with your father, Madison Square Garden, pardon me, to when you knew you wanted to be involved in the business professionally, when did that click? Was that over the course of years, several shows? Did you want to be a wrestler first, or did you just want to be on the business side?
I could pretty much tell you the history of wrestling fandom in about 2 minutes, just telling you my life story.
We got 3 minutes. Go for it.
and I'm here as long as you need me. I'm bored out of my mind.
No, I'm kidding. We got plenty of time, Mr. Ginzburg. We're fine.
So we had early sheets. This was pre-internet.
Mm-hmm.
You would get your results from other fans who, and this fan was in Florida, and this other fan was in LA, and this other fan, was in Memphis, and you kind of begun to understand how it all worked out. Like Freddie Blassie was a beloved face in LA, and he was an evil heel in New York, and you start putting the pieces together. And I started writing for these early sheets. And in 1990, 30 years ago, I started my own sheet. It was called Wrestling Then and Now, and Killer Kowalski wrote for us, and other notables in the industry. And but I took it from a whole different perspective. What does this mean to me, as opposed to a bombardment of information, a bombardment of results? That was never my thing. I came at it as, my father died in 1980. I was 20 years old, and he took me to wrestling. So among my greatest memories in my life was going to wrestling with my dad. So wrestling means something different to me. And many people say that. My uncle took me, my aunt took me, my grandfather, and most of these people are gone decades later. And you realize just how important these experiences were to you. My cousin is in England. He'll say word for word what I'm saying, but he'll go, I saw them at Liverpool. Big Daddy, Giant Haystacks, you know, and it means the same thing to him as Bruno or Billy Graham would to me, you know, childhood heroes. And so I started doing the sheet. And then what I've learned in life is whenever you're doing something and it's public, somebody else notices. And I got asked to be on a 50,000 watt radio station, WBAI FM in New York City, which is Pacifica, which is very left-leaning politically. And you can see by my shirt, keep the immigrants, deport the racist. Okay?
There
Okay?
you go. There you go.
So now you know my politics. Anyway.
Just humane politics.
Yeah. And so I'm at BAI, and it's 50,000 watts. It's a famous station. I start inviting these legendary wrestlers down to the station, you know, or on the phone, depending where they were located. And I did this for 16 years. 16 years. And I'm talking to Sherry Martel, late night,
favorite.
3 in the morning. And she goes, I'm on the road 15 years. I didn't see my kid grow up. I'm talking to Eddie Guerrero, okay? And he's sobbing. Art Barr had just died 2-3 weeks earlier. Guy's sobbing on air, okay? I mean, I'm talking to Lou Thez, you know, Vern Gagne, Bruno. I mean, the greatest legends in the history of this business. And you know, it was a great experience. And from that, I made all these contacts, and I eventually fell into being an agent. I just kind of fell into it. These guys are like, why don't you book me? You know, all right. I mean, I'll do my best. I was new to it, and I would take Johnny and Nikolai and Jimmy Valiant and Lanny Poffo, and you know, these guys would be sleeping on my couch, and I'd be like pinching myself. There's Johnny Valiant sleeping on my couch, you know? I mean, as a kid, the Valiant Brothers were the #1 tag team in the world.
Yeah, yes, they were.
And it was quite an experience, and Johnny wanted to do stand-up comedy. So I produced his one-man show, and we took that all over the country. And so, like I said, one thing leads to another, and I'm sitting with Johnny and Nikolai at an autograph appearance, and that led to The Wrestler, and that led to working in movies. So I tell people you got to be in it to win it. Once you take yourself out of stuff, it's over. So, you know, and I always have tried to do quality work. Quality. Okay, I don't want to. If somebody once said to me, Evan, we're doing something on Chris Benoit, and I go, I'll pass. You know, it kind of felt like blood money to me. You know.
Yeah.
And you know, The Wrestler is, you know, it's a beautiful film. I tell people all the time, you don't have to be a boxing fan to enjoy Rocky. It was about Rocky and Adrian, and you know, the brother-in-law Paulie, and you know, there's 13 to 16 minutes of wrestling and boxing in each movie, in The Wrestler and Rocky. You don't even have to be a fan to appreciate those movies. And
I must say, I did notice with 350 Days that it's one of the most unbiased wrestling documentaries I've come across, because you really just let the wrestlers speak for themselves rather than, you know, whenever I watch a WWE documentary, it's always, you know,
it's
propaganda.
Yeah. It's like it's a slam job on whatever the topic is. Like with the Ultimate Warrior one, like that just was completely like right leaning as far as anti Jim Hellwig.
I watched that Andre the Giant documentary, and I thought the strong points were him with his friends and family, and the weak point was when it veered off into, you know, 30, 40 minutes about WrestleMania. You know, It's like, you know, it took away from the human part of it. I wanted to know more about what was it like to be a giant in a small, you know, in a regular person's world, and the physical pain and the emotional pain, and they veered off. I think it was a good documentary that could have been a great documentary. And WWE, you know, they have all the money in the world, and I don't think the world really needs the Marine 17. I think, you know, shoot high.
You gotta keep the Miz in work, though. The Miz,
Yeah. Shoot high, don't shoot low. You know.
Being 12 years from the wrestler, I'd say it's more like 10 years because 350 Days did come out about 2 years ago, but we do want to get it in the eyes of more viewers. Was the craving to make this film something you had right after the wrestler? Was there a hole that you realized you wanted to fill with making a sort of behind the music with a very
I'll tell you exactly what happened. The executive producer, again, the money guy, Darren Antola, another Darren, he approaches me, and at first I really wasn't interested. I'm just like, why would I make another wrestling movie? You can't top the wrestler. You can't top the wrestler. So, and then I saw, you know, the guy's pitching me, and it was from the heart. He's like, I grew up on these guys. I love Dibiase and Randy Savage, another mid-'80s wrestling fan. He's 48 years old now. So he goes back to that mid-'80s. And he really loved the business. And he was a boxing cut man and trainer. So he was like, he was a tough guy. He wasn't some slick Hollywood guy. And I liked him. I could see, blue collar guy. His heart was in the right place. He pitches me the movie. And I go, yeah, let's do it. And basically, in 350 Days, for those who don't know, guys like Ric Flair, Flair's not in the movie, but Bret Hart and Billy Graham we label as the stars. Bret Hart said to us, he worked 336 days at his peak. Okay, Greg Valentine said to me face to face, he goes, he's in the movie. He goes, Evan, I worked 320 days 1 year. So think about it. Starcade, Christmas Day. Survivor Series, Thanksgiving Day. Sorry, kids, Daddy's not home for Christmas or Thanksgiving. Daddy might not have been there for your birth, your wedding, your graduation, your high school football game, whatever the case may be. Okay, Daddy was on the road. Wendy Richter's in the movie. Okay, she said, you know, I couldn't have a baby. Where was I going to put the baby? On the ring apron? I was out of town every night. So basically, the film, again, we shot high. We weren't going to do the shoot interview. Who was the booker in Chattanooga in 1972? That wasn't what we were going for.
Right.
It was like, tell us about the sacrifices you made. You know, you weren't home, the divorces, the temptations. You know, people in the movie said, you know, I was an adulterer. I cheated, you know, and they had guilt, real guilt. They poured their guts out. Some of them were married 2 or 3 times. Some of them had strained relationships with their kids. They weren't there. They just weren't there. And, you know, the toll that it takes. And part of what I've learned over the years, and we showed it in The Wrestler even more so, some of these guys headlined Madison Square Garden. They ended up pushing a broom or working a door at a strip club because Vince and these guys didn't take care of them. No pensions, no 401ks, no health benefits. You know, what happens when your body gives out at 40, 45, 50, whatever the case may be. Today, even younger because of the high spots. But back then, these guys would go, you know, into their 50s at times, some even older. And, you know, what's plan B? Blue collar guy, no education, no other job skills. It's, you know, some of them, not all, I'm not making a blanket statement. Some ended well. Nikolai ended well. Bret Hart ended well. But it's not all, believe me. And, you know, Jim Cornette, who I love, the Midnight Express is my all-time favorite tag team.
Yes.
He didn't like the wrestler. He's like, the guy's living in a trailer. But we're like, a lot of these guys did not end up well. This isn't, you know, when we didn't sugarcoat it. And Darren's movies lean dark to begin with.
Yeah.
Did you see Mother? Did you see Mother? Oh my God. That movie is so dark,
Yeah.
you know?
Black
So-
Swan, I mean, he took a theme. He took what everybody knew as being this beautiful, I want to say athletic performance on a stage, much like wrestling is being a ballerina, and twisted it in a way that I didn't see coming. And I'm an Aronofsky fan. I didn't know where he was going to go with Black Swan, which is very similar to what he did with The Wrestler.
Yeah.
It wasn't as psychedelic, I guess you could say, but it definitely took it in a direction that no one had done before with the subject that people were used to enjoying and smiling at. A lighthearted performance, I guess you could say, and just really just dug the nails into the griminess.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
world.
Universally, a lot of actors, dancers, musicians, athletes do not end up well. The LeBron James making, $40 million a year is the exception to the rule, especially in pro wrestling and boxing. These are fields where most of these guys do not end up well. And I've seen as an agent, these guys terribly exploited, just, carted from gig to gig, like an old workhorse, and here's $300. Guy used to headline Madison Square Garden. Here's $300. It's a very exploitative business, pro wrestling, and I don't want to make blanket statements. I've met great promoters who love the business, but I once saw Johnny Valiant wrestle Jimmy Snooker on an indie. I brought him down there. I booked them on the card. The promoters, every seat was full. They were the main event. They put on as good a match as they could in their 50s. It was a solid match. It wouldn't have been what it was 20 years later, but it was solid. They did their best. Okay. So the promoter comes up to us afterwards. Johnny, the house was a little light. I know we said this, but can I give you that? And we said, no. You promised us this, and we did our part, and you're going to give us what you promised us. And what that means is you never get booked there again or whatnot. But that's the sleazy part of the wrestling business.
Undertone. Yeah.
I
So,
definitely agree.
as a coming from like a filmmaker's background, especially since you're like one of the first like movie industry people to be on here as well. Of course, you've got the wrestling background, lifelong wrestling fan. A film that's coming up. It's been announced. We don't know if they're gonna 100% go through with it, and I don't know how much you know about this project. It's the Hulk Hogan biopic starring
Chris Hemsworth.
The writers are John Polano and Scott Silver, and then it's directed by Todd Phillips, who directed the Joker movie
And The Hangover.
and the Hangover movies.
Well, I would say the same thing. If they treat it honestly and artfully, like Aronofsky did with The Wrestler, it should be great. The Joker was tremendous. I mean, if they whitewash it and, he's America's superhero, take your vitamin pills, then it's going to be fluff. It'll be fluff. But my gut tells me a guy that did something as dark as the Joker, he should do a good job on this.
He might be bringing up the man cast stuff. He might go that route.
Well, you want to know something? It would make it, if you go the dark route, I think the contrast between the heights that Hogan reached, and I was there mid-'80s, Piper, Hogan, Madison Square Garden. Hogan was on fire, but if you treat it honestly, I think it's going to be tremendous. And, it's not a competition. I mean, I'd love to see more great movies on wrestling.
Ready to Rumble. I'm kidding. I'm totally
it was fun.
That's campy.
Yeah,
but it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Was there a vision going into what you wanted to do with 350 Days that was fulfilled? Did you want to have it be a continuation of, an expose, I guess you could say, that it's not a glorious life, it is a grind, it doesn't always end up well? Was that the vision you guys had, or did you just end up there?
I just said to Darren, I said, make this about the sacrifices, the toll these guys paid. There's a segment in the movie on injuries, and they show you Stan Hansen, Bret Hart. Every part of their body has been destroyed.
Yeah.
They're pointing to every part of their body. And, you know, I've had wrestlers say to me, Evan, I'm always in pain. Always. Imagine that, okay? People, you know, Vince portrays them as cartoon characters, but when you see a Harley Race in a wheelchair or an Abdullah the Butcher in a wheelchair, it's heartbreaking, because I know these guys in their prime. They were fierce, okay? So basically what we said with 350 Days is tell the story, don't whitewash it, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll, but the sacrifice that these guys made, and you know, they pour their hearts out, and it's all there on the screen. Our editor, Mike Burlingame, he worked with Paul McCartney, Mariah Carey, John Cougar Mellencamp. Okay, he worked with the biggest people, you know, in the industry, and he was not a wrestling guy. And I said to Darren, I said, he's perfect. He doesn't know the mid-card guys from the prelim guys, from the legends. He's gonna pick out the best content, you know, in this movie. He whittled down 90 hours of footage to an hour 48. Picture that. Okay, so everything in that movie is from the heart. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I agree 100%. The fact, because this movie itself, which I've seen, I mean, it should be, you know, it's the way how I see it, in my opinion, is really how you said, the sacrifices that they, as performers and in human individuals, put to perform for us fans, and well, even prior fans like yourself as well, current fans, should be taken as appreciative of what they've done in the independent, you know, in the wrestling circuit. And I think this should be a film for any upcoming pro wrestler who wants to become a pro wrestler, to look at the sacrifices of what they have, you know, they've done, you know, sacrificing their lives and making wrestling, you know, what it is today. That's how I see it. I mean, I don't know, everybody else.
You, I have friends who work indies, and you know, I know guys on the indies that have had concussion after concussion, surgery after surgery, and they never got the fame or the money. So, you know, even the indie guys sacrifice. What's that?
A lot of these guys I've known, they've never even seen a camera, like in their venue. You know, it's just the love of the sport and the performance.
And it's also like a surrogate family sometimes. The you know, the promotion, you're on the road with these guys, you're eating after the match, drinking, partying, whatever the case may be. And, you know, it's bonding. And, you know, I've supported especially the East Coast indies for decades. And I know these guys, and, you know, a lot of them never got that payoff. I know guys that made it to a WWE tryout and weren't picked up. So you're this close, and then your dream, you know, doesn't happen. So it's a rough business. It's a very rough business. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Now, since you're familiar with the territories, do you feel, especially right now with these upcoming promoters, I mean, promotions that are coming, like, you know, AEW, you still have Ring of Honor still around, you have MOW still around, NWA, you know, being backed by Billy Corgan and Marquez, bringing that around. And for your opinion, do you feel that they should there be a unionize within these territories?
Of course. These guys, if you turn on Raw, think about it.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing scripted promos, okay? So they're memorizing lines. They're doing bad comedy. WWE's forte is comedy that isn't funny, okay? Okay? They do really. So these guys are actors for a chunk of that show. They should be in Screen Actors Guild. They should be unionized. Andrew Yang is fighting for them now. He's a powerful guy.
I just heard about that on another podcast. Yang is really, really fighting to get
yeah, much respect, man.
He's trying to get the Ali Act in MMA too. He's really about the sports entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, he's a down-to-earth guy, and you could see he loves it, and he was a big Randy Savage fan, and etc., so on. So let powerful guys fight for this. You know, Vince unloaded tons of talent mid-pandemic. How much more ruthless could you be? Okay.
The great exodus of April 2020.
I mean, you know, the guy's a billionaire. You know, take care of these people. I'm sure Stephanie and Triple H and Shane are okay. They don't have to worry about a job. You know, it's very. I'm glad Yang is on top of it, and the guy on HBO from England, what's his name again?
Oh, I know. Shoot, I forgot his name as well.
Anyway, we don't.
Sorry to that guy.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, that's high profile also. Yeah. So I'm glad that suddenly, you know, attention is being paid. That, you know, there's a trail of dead wrestlers a mile long. They've done studies. Look at a WWF pay-per-view, late 80s. Compare it to football, baseball, basketball, hockey. The death rate is much higher. Why? There's no off season. They're in pain. They're taking painkillers. Okay? Why? They don't want to lose their spot. They don't want to lose their spot. They don't want to even admit sometimes they're in pain. They're hurt. They need time off. It's a ruthless business, and somebody should be protecting them, because the guys on top, you know, they're not going to fight for the union. They're not. They got, you know, there's guys in WWE making big money. What's that?
Greedy. They're greedy. They're not. That's why they won't fight for the union.
You know, I mean, at BAM, look at it this way. You turn on a WWE pay-per-view. There's Randy Orton and Jey Uso and Roman Reigns and New Day, and these guys have been there 15 years, whatever. It's like they got a mountain of young talent that they're not using. Give these guys an off season, build up the young talent. Even if it was from Thanksgiving to January 2nd, the holiday season or whatever, give them a couple weeks off to recover. And you know, the human body. I mean, you could promote them as Superman or a supervillain out of a comic book, but you know, these are human beings, flesh and blood, and wrestlers cringe at the word fake. They cringe because gravity isn't fake. You throw a big guy in the air and he lands, it's not fake. You know?
Yeah, definitely. So we can have actually our viewers to get to know where do they actually locate 350 Days. If you would like to let them know where they can actually find it so they can actually watch this film.
Sure. 350 Days, we have a Facebook page. You can go to 350daysthemovie.com. We're available on Vudu and Tubi and Amazon Prime and iTunes. We have worldwide distribution. We're everywhere. It's not hard to find. We're not on Netflix for whatever reason, but Amazon Prime. And, you know, we're out there. It's not hard to find. And I also do a radio show called Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. We do 1-hour interviews with unsung heroes of the wrestling business. You could check that out. And many years ago, this is a funny story. When I first started being an agent in wrestling, I was a school teacher, and this producer director out of California, Dwayne Walker, said, you know, that would be an interesting movie. So he followed me around. We visited Killer Kowalski, Nikolai Volkov, you know, Don Dr. Death Arnold, these old school legends. They're all gone now. We did this around 2002 or so, and that's on Amazon Prime also. And I get, you know, massive royalty checks of like $25 a year because nobody knows about it. But it's actually from the heart, done on pennies. So you can check that out. And I'm just going to mention this quickly since it's Veterans Day, and I don't want to give people the wrong impression. I'm not only about wrestling. I did a documentary on Wounded Warriors. It's called Teresa Sario Alive Again. And we went to Walter Reed Hospital, and we filmed there with the full cooperation
Very
of
nice.
the U.S. military. And I met guys who, had 3 limbs blown off. One guy was blinded. He was burned over a huge portion of his body. He had a hole in his head. A hole in his head. Okay? People have no idea what these wounded warriors go through. And it was a life-changing experience for me because, whenever some minor problem, came up, I would go, this guy's living in a hospital for 2 years, trying to survive. Some don't make it. My father was a veteran. He was a medic in World War II. He was shot on the battlefield. He saw friends die, okay? And he came home, and I was a kid, and he'd wake up screaming. And back then, we didn't even know what PTSD was. We didn't even know, and he was in charge of freeing a concentration camp in Germany. He did the clerical to free these guys. And he said they looked like human skeletons, and and this affected him. I mean, he came back and he worked and he supported a family, but I'm just saying this because today just happens to be Veterans Day. And
Definitely.
it's appropriate, but the veterans really, really sacrifice, and it's disgraceful when the politicians ignore them also, really.
Evan, it's stuff like this that reminds me of, work like, Johnny Went and Got His Gun, directed by Trumbo.
Yeah,
like
Dalton Trumbo, yeah.
Yeah.
That movie was so rough, they kind of buried it, yeah.
Yeah, that movie is still, to me, I consider that the most horrifying movie that I've ever watched in my life, just because I can't imagine myself in his shoes.
Well, imagine I'm in the hospital, and this kid, I'm talking in his 20s, the guy's missing 3 limbs. And so for the rest of his life, his mother, his girlfriend, his wife, whatever, they're his caretakers. This is plus the emotional and psychological trauma some of these guys go through. So, you can't just send kids out to war. You have to take care of them if they come back damaged. Yeah. And, that shouldn't be a money issue. That shouldn't be a political issue.
Yeah,
you help these guys,
Yeah, definitely.
For the viewers at home that don't know, the Wounded Warrior Project is a charity project designed to help veterans who come home from tours of duty who may not either have a place or a means to help them get to the next step in their life. The documentary, are those two, is it connected to that project, or is it just about veterans who have come through?
It's about a singer, Teresa Sario. She was standing on a corner waiting for a light to change, and a car caused an accident, ripped her leg off. She was waiting for the light to change from red to green, okay, on the curb, okay? No fault of her own. And she was a professional singer. And she's like, well, what do I do now? I'm a one-legged singer. And she started singing for the military. And, and she would visit the wounded warriors because she could relate to their trauma, because she had a very similar trauma. And through her and her connections, we had, we were granted access at Walter Reed Hospital, and we did this documentary, which also, was not a big budget film, but was from the heart. It always has to be from the heart. You could take $100-200 million and make the worst action movie that's unwatchable, and you could, the wrestler ultimately was done on $6 million. That's nothing. That's not even a star's salary in Hollywood. No, really. So you could create art on a budget, and believe me, 350 days was a lot less than 6 million. Okay, but we put 6 years into that. So, when it comes from the heart, and you have, people who are skilled and know what they want, and, you could look, you guys are doing a quality podcast, quality radio show, whatever you want to label it. Now, I watch wrestling podcasts and radio shows. Some of them are numbing. I don't need the obligatory 30-minute Raw wrap-up or the pay-per-view review, or talk to real people about real things, and it's it doesn't have to be cookie cutter, everything in the wrestling business.
Right. Absolutely agreed. Yeah, I mean, mostly it was with us here. Mostly we're in SoCal. We basically more obviously exposed more to the independent scene. That's what we like to do, and what we love to do.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of independent wrestlers, like how he said earlier, that they need to be exposed because they're very talented. In and out of the ring, and as a human being, and then as a performer.
Do you know my co-host? My co-host is Buddy Sotelo. He used to work for APW.
Really? I did not know that.
He was a heel manager. Yeah.
I did not know that. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna look. I'm gonna look at my
APW, Roland Alexander, Beyond the Mat. That's notorious.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I knew
That's
that.
all right. I remember that, but I'm like
Bay Area, right? San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were a good promotion. I went down there one night just with Tiger Khan, and they had a lot of good guys come out of there. Donovan Morgan. Yeah.
Exactly. You talked earlier about a story where some wrestlers will go through the entire WWE tryout process, get right to the door, and have it slammed on their face. Somebody from that promotion in the Beyond the Mat documentary, that actually happened to. And that's what that story reminded me of.
Oh, yeah.
I forget his name, but a lot of that documentary was about him finding out he had his tryout, going through a couple dark matches, getting his tryout in front of Vince. Vince just so close, just right there, and just, sorry, pal, maybe next year.
I mean, you have to understand, you're a wrestler. Obviously, you would understand. You're in a tag match. There's 4 guys. Everybody has to perform. If one guy chokes, if one guy doesn't deliver, the match isn't what it should have been. They're not impressed, and maybe you're not getting that second shot.
Exactly.
It's a rough business. I hate to be repetitive, but
no, it's all good.
No, definitely. I mean, it is a rough business, most definitely. And like I said, hopefully, how we discuss about unionizing, hopefully these independent promoters could give a pension or something, helping these performers out. And hopefully, in the near future, we'll see. We already heard about. I don't know. You heard about Wrestle Connects, the nonprofit, which they just barely launched. They're going to be doing that now,
right.
Providing that. Obviously, Mr. Marquez is one of the ambassadors alongside with Sergeant Slaughter, and but yeah, definitely.
I'll tell you a great Sergeant Slaughter story.
Okay.
I'm at Madison Square Garden, December 8, 1980. It's the one show Backlund isn't on. He's in Japan. The main event is Bruno and heel Sergeant Slaughter. And Slaughter was great, unbelievable heel back then. So they have this tremendous brawl. I walk out of Madison Square Garden, and there's just like a weird vibe in the air, like something's strange. And like everybody's like whispering, and not the wrestling fans. I mean, I'm walking towards the train station. So I walk up to a total stranger. I go, "What happened?" And they go, "John Lennon just got shot."
Oh God. So it's like 1982, right?
December 8, 1980. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. And somebody wrote a book about the night John Lennon was shot, and they put that story in there. Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, you could feel it in the air that something was wrong. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, one last thing before we get call it a night. Now, do you have a message for our viewers? Message for anyone who wants to become a professional wrestler or anything at all? Like you work in the film industry. Do you have a message for any viewers out there?
Absolutely, and I'll improv this. Give 110%. Create art. Okay? If you're a wrestler, don't take somebody's stale gimmick. We don't need, another, Steve Austin clone. It's been done to death. We don't need another guy with the same tattoo, the same shaved head, the same gimmick. It's, be original, create art, learn from the masters. If you see an old school guy there, pick his brain, and I've sat with Jim Cornette while he watched matches, and it's not about 87 high spots. It's about telling a story and controlling the fans. And most of all, it doesn't matter how old you are. At some point, your body will give out. Have an education or a skill, a trade to fall back on. And, understand this isn't forever. You might make it to WWE, and 1, 2, 3 years later, they future endeavor you for whatever their reason. And your career peaked at 25, and it's all downhill after that. So always have a plan B. And, Johnny Valiant used to say, enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. You're going to meet I tell people all the time, in the wrestling business, I've met some of the most interesting, eclectic, brilliant people. And I've met people I wouldn't spit on if they were on fire. Both extremes.
Doesn't Cornette has a line like that where it's like, I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire or something like that.
Yeah, I cleaned it up. I wouldn't spit on you if you were on fire. But no, really, it's a business of extremes. I mean, you could be headlining Madison Square Garden one day and be at the Elks Lodge, making a couple $100 the next day, or vice versa. I saw Bray Wyatt at the local Elks Lodge. Next thing you know, the guy's headlining the Garden. I mean, it's a crazy business. But
I was trained by Excalibur, and now he's my favorite commentary of all time. Like, I'm just like seeing that. It was 20 years ago, but that path, like you mentioned, it can happen. As long as you said, put in 110%.
I mean, if anybody told me, you'd be involved with an Oscar-worthy movie, I'd say you're nuts. It's like, I was an agent, but you have to be out there for things to happen. And that's what I would tell people. And the other thing today is, be on top of your social media. If you're a wrestler, get that buzz, get that, let people know you're out there, let people see your stuff. And, like, I know sometimes the wrestlers who really, really promote themselves, the other wrestlers get jealous. He's a mark for himself. No, you better promote yourself. Promote yourself.
As a musician, you wouldn't talk to a guy in a band and be like, quit sharing your song.
I know.
Who does
ridiculous.
that? Exactly.
It's ridiculous. So it's a long-winded way of saying, give 110%, follow your dream, create your art, but at the same time, understand, prepare for the future, because it will not last forever. It will not last forever. I'm going to make movies the rest of my life. I don't know if we'll ever top The Wrestler or even 350 Days as a documentary, but, I'll sure try. And, you got to put your heart and soul into things and understand the sacrifice. Johnny Valiant, he was a kid from Pittsburgh, and he timidly knocked on Bruno's door. Timidly. Mr. Sammartino, I'm a big fan. Can you, train me? And, he was like 16 years old, and Bruno looked at him like a kid, and he's like, well, first you have to bulk up. So Johnny would go down to the Y, and he'd be eating like, pasta and mashed potatoes, and all of a sudden he's 240, pushing the weights. And, and one day he looks across the ring, and there's Bruno Sammartino. He's wrestling Bruno Sammartino at the Garden. How surreal that is. This guy trained you as a kid. So, dream big, but plan in case or when things, don't work out, because it is ups and downs in any business.
Definitely. Mr. Ginzburg, I really appreciate your time. I thank you so much
my pleasure.
For producing, 350 Days. I did enjoy it.
Associate producer. It's a team effort.
Well, a team effort. But it's like we're a team, and obviously with the wrestler as well. And hopefully we get to see upcoming future projects that you will do, and just keep us informed, keep our viewers informed. I will put the description below, ladies and gentlemen. Where can you find Mr. Ginzburg? I'll put his social media platforms on
My
Instagram.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
and Twitter.
And thank you for supporting independent film and
Of course.
independent wrestling and
Yellow
independent
Bulletin.
everything. Independent music.
Yes.
Independent music. Support independent everything. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All right,
My
guys.
pleasure. My
You guys
pleasure.
have a great night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.